If you're watching this on YouTube, you might have noticed that this episode is a week delayed. But if you want to get early access to our episodes, consider becoming a paying member. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with your friends. Thank you for all your support.
Hi everyone, I'm Taryn Southern here today with Richard Dawkins. We are taking questions from his YouTube and X and other social media platforms. So if you want to submit questions for the next episode, please feel free to do so. So your first question is from Tui Griffin, and Tui asks, if eugenics is immoral when it comes to humans, is selective breeding of animals also immoral?
That's a very good question. First of all, some people think that eugenics wouldn't work with humans, and obviously it would work with humans. There's no reason why humans should be unique, because it works with animals, so there's no reason why it shouldn't work with humans. The questioner has a very good point that if it's supposed to be immoral with humans, why wouldn't it be immoral with animals? I think it would be unfortunate if it were practiced on humans in the sort of Hitler-type way, which is a compulsory government-sponsored, government-organized eugenics. That would be immoral. The alternative view is for not government-sponsored but voluntary eugenics from people who say know that they've got a gene for, let's say, hemophilia in the family, and perhaps they know that the woman is a carrier for hemophilia or some other such disease which is carried on an X chromosome. Then using IVF, using in vitro fertilization, what you can do is extract one cell from, say, an 8-cell zygote, an 8-cell embryo, and analyze its genes. And normally you have a sample of, say, 10 different eggs, different zygotes to choose from, to implant back in the woman. And that's done at random at present. If you could sample the genes from the 10 available embryos and pick one of the ones that doesn't have the hemophilia, whatever it is, then it's hard to see how anybody could see that as immoral. That would be a perfectly sensible kind of eugenics. It's rather a shame that the word eugenics becomes tarred with the brush of the sort of dictatorial Hitler-type eugenics, whereas a very humane type would be the use of it with IVF to make sure that some hereditary disease like hemophilia is not passed on.
Yeah, I was actually curious if there are any other words that have become populated, because obviously eugenics has quite a negative connotation to it. And if there are any frameworks that you've come across, Richard, around this line between the selective breeding out of diseases and maybe selective breeding of certain desirable characteristics, such as I want my child to have blue eyes.
Yeah, that's a difficult one.
Right.
I was talking about negative, removing things like hemophilia.
Right.
When it's a case of wanting your child to have blue eyes or wanting the child to be a brilliant musician or a brilliant mathematician, that's much more controversial. And I think there'd be a great deal of opposition to that.
Yes. Okay, great. Fresh Beetles sent you a question and asked, do you think evolutionary biology is more important to the human species than, say, astrophysics?
I wouldn't like to judge more important. No, I think they're both equally important. I mean, I'm very much an academic scientist, so I think they're both extremely interesting, both extremely important. So I wouldn't want to choose between them. I think they should be both supported, both sponsored, and both done.
Wonderful. Catherine Campbell states, she says, I get really discouraged about the grasp of religion and wokeism on people. Are you optimistic about the future? And if so, why or how? Thank you for your work.
I'm sort of optimistic in the sense that these things come and go. And I think that, for example, just as McCarthyism is now dead, whereas in the 1950s it was extremely powerful, I think that the sort of dictatorial wokeism that we're seeing at present will pass in the same kind of way. Religion has a much longer history, of course, and that may take centuries to go.
What do you think are the mechanisms that shift the tides back into alternate directions. That you've probably seen enough of that happen over time.
Yes, that's interesting, isn't it? Just a gradual shift of opinion. I don't know what it is. People sometimes say something like it's in the air. Opinions just seem to shift all over the world, all over the parts of the world that we see much of anyway. And it's hard to tell. I think it's a sort of combination of gossip and dinner party conversations and newspapers, journalism, judges, courts of law, all these sorts of things contribute to the shift of opinion. And I'm just looking forward to the change in the present climate of opinion.
I mean, I'll just say from sort of witnessing how you've approached difficult conversations, I think sometimes having the first person willing to stand up, raise their hand, and essentially deliver an opinion that is not, of the woke mind, but not without essentially, being able to put something out there that does not have dire consequences to that person, I think is a mark of that early courage, and then other people follow suit.
Well, yes, I mean, nothing to J.K. Rowling, who's really out there in the thick of it. She's invited the Scottish government to arrest her, and it will be very entertaining if they do. I mean, she's not an easy person to put in prison, I would have thought.
Correct. But I suppose it's the people like that happening in greater numbers that'll have for the tides to turn. They say, okay, well, I guess if we express this opinion, we won't be fired from our jobs. We won't be put in prison. So maybe it's okay. Okay, Chris C. wants to know, are Islam and wokeism signs of the weakness of humanism to protect strong Western values? Some people even use it as a religion to help anti-Western values to expand with non-scientific dogmas. Humanism could be reformed, or will it be replaced by something else?
Well, I suppose you could say that Western liberals are soft on both. So if you think about the sort of pro-Islamic bias of Western liberals, which runs flat contrary to what we all believe about feminism, about the treatment of women, about the treatment of gay people, and yet, whereas they're very quick to criticize Christianity for poor treatment of women, for abortion and anti-abortion and so on, Islam gets a free pass. And so to that extent, I suppose, softness towards Islam and softness towards wokeism go together. I get that point he's making. Yeah,
that's an interesting point. And he says humanism could be reformed, or will it be replaced by something else?
Well, I would think reformed. I would hope reformed.
Yes. Okay, Marcos wants to know on X how genes relate to sexual orientations and gender.
Sexual orientation, I take that means homosexual, heterosexual, that kind of thing.
Right.
It's difficult to investigate these things. One of the ways to do it is twin studies, where you look at, if you have a pair of identical twins and if one of them is gay, is there a strong tendency for the other one to be gay? And the answer is yes. If you compare that with fraternal twins, with non-identical twins, who share only half the genes, as opposed to all of them, of the relevant ones. So yes, there is a genetic component to sexual orientation, and that I believe is established. It doesn't mean it's inevitable, but that there is a strong strong genetic component to the variation.
Very interesting. I'm reading The Nurture Assumption right now. I don't know if that's a book that you've come across.
Remind me of the author.
Oh goodness, I'd have to go run into my room and find it. It's a female out of the East Coast. Steven Pinker wrote the introduction to the book.
Right.
Not in the 1990s, but then she did a follow-up with some more advanced studies where she essentially just says parenting doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with that. Yes, that's very interesting, very surprising. The idea that peers are much more influential.
Yes.
Than parents. It's rather disconcerting to anybody, to a parent, I suppose. And Steven Pinker is very big on that. Yes, it's interesting.
I asked my mother, I said, because I'm very different from my parents, I said, what percentage of me do you think came from your parenting versus my genes versus my peers? And she actually said, your peers seem to shape you the most in terms of who you became as an adult. So I mean, that's one anecdotal experience, but fascinating. Okay, the next question from Angie. Why do you, a man of science, deny the reality that trans people exist? Why do you feel the need to hate a minority group that only wants to live their life as their true self and be left alone?
That's a ridiculous question. I don't deny their existence, and I don't in any way oppress them. What I object to is the statement, a woman can have a penis. A trans woman is a woman. I object to that because that's a distortion of language and a distortion of science. But as to saying they don't exist, that's absurd. Of course they exist. And there's no reason why they shouldn't exist.
Right. And I find that it's so easy in these conversations nowadays because language has been co-opted in such a way where you can't actually say something as it is without being accused of, denying that someone exists.
Well, exactly. Yes. I mean, to go from saying that a trans woman is not a woman as a scientific fact to saying you think they don't exist, meaning they don't live and they shouldn't live, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I'm fed up with that kind of distortion.
Or to assume that what you're saying is somehow hateful. That too, right?
Well, quite. I mean, that's totally ridiculous. It's simply a scientific fact that sex is determined in a biological way, which I could go into, but probably won't. And the fact that people have a psychological feeling that they're born into the wrong body, that's a psychological fact, which I think is probably true. And I have great sympathy with such people.
And I actually was just thinking about this this last week, and I'm curious what you feel some of the larger implications might be for science. These sort of culture wars, given that all of scientific study separates people by sex. You have your male and your female studies being done. It's very important to do so. What happens when all of a sudden, we're sort of denying that fact?
Yes, well, sex throughout the animal and plant kingdoms is defined by gamete size. Sperms are tiny compared with eggs, and that defines the sexes all over the animal kingdom. And we understand why that is. We understand how that came about. We understand the universality of it. That is the universal biological definition of sex differences. The way sex is determined in various animals is very different. In mammals, it's the XXXY system. In birds, it's a similar system, but the other way around. As you know, in mammals, it's the XY that's the male. In birds, it's the equivalent of the XY that's the female. In many reptiles, it's done by temperature. In some fish, it's done by dominance hierarchy. So there are lots of different ways in which sex is determined in embryology. But sex is defined by gamete size. And that's a universal biological definition. There are no exceptions to that.
What are your thoughts on the rise of pseudoscience and anti-scientific sentiment in contemporary society? Just as we were speaking about, this is a question.
Yes, I'm not sure what the questioner has in mind there. If it is about the denial of sex differences, then I guess we've just covered it. But maybe they mean something else.
I think that was certainly an example that fit.
Well, creationism would be another stark case which has been around for a while, and that again is deplorable. The science is absolutely clear, and it's deplorable that so many people in America still think the world is only 6,000 years old. I mean, that's a real absurd denial of scientific fact.
Absolutely. But there's also this huge rise of sort of anti-scientific inquiry because of social media and the rise of influencers and healers and people who are going out there saying, don't pay attention to the mainstream sort of line of thinking. And this has become popularized.
Yes, is it? I guess I don't maybe follow the right influences to know that.
It's shocking. I mean, everything from, I'll tell you one example that I've seen gain a lot of traction is women who reject the idea of having a hospital birth and want to do sort of midwife home birthing. And I don't know enough.
Yes.
I've never been pregnant. I've never had a child. I don't know enough about this process of giving birth to know what is sort of right or wrong. But I do know that childbirth for women for many, many, many years, throughout history, there was a likelihood of death from giving birth. And those rates went way down when you started doing hospital.
Yes. Well, humans are not very good at this because we have a conflict between the need to have a big brain and the difficulty of passing through the female pelvis. And so it's an uneasy compromise, which is exceedingly painful and as you say, dangerous unless you're having proper supervision. Because many births are perfectly natural and work perfectly well, but I wouldn't risk it.
Yes. So I think, in my view, the part of the problem is that people are going online, they're seeing these videos and pieces of content, and they're thinking of a time in their life where science somehow failed them with their health, and they haven't actually learned that science is really a method of thinking and applying that process and that method to any kind of decision making that they arrive at.
Yes, I mean, to reject science per se is, of course, ridiculous. Scientists make mistakes and there can be bad science, but bad science needs to be replaced by good science. And science is the only way we know to get the correct answer to questions about the natural world. So to reject science is preposterous.
Can I ask you, what do you feel are the greatest risks or problems with science as an industry, or science as it engages with industry? Things that impact, as you say, these mistakes that scientists make.
Yes, I suppose when it gets corrupted by financial concerns, when people are motivated more by financial greed than by the desire for truth. I mean, when it first became clear that smoking caused lung cancer, and with a very high probability caused lung cancer, there was a tendency for some scientists to be bought by the tobacco industry to deny this fact. And so, because scientists are like they're human beings, and so they are potentially corruptible. But fortunately, science has methods in place for overcoming that, and other scientists come along and verify or test the statements of their predecessors. And so science has this self-correcting process, which should take care of that.
Eat stress-free this spring with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. Choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, Keto, Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. Also, discover more than 60 add-ons every week, like breakfast, on-the-go lunch, snacks, and beverages to help you stay fueled and feel good all day long. Plus, you can save the environment while savoring your lunch. Watch for the Earth Month Eats badge on the menu for our meals with the lowest carbon footprint. Head to factormeals.com/reality50 and use code reality50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code reality50 at factormeals.com/reality50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. What are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals.
Demestro says, it was a pleasure watching you at the Union as an undergraduate. My question, which I never got to ask, was there's something I never understood. What is your view of mindfulness Buddhist practices, not as a religion, on the role of development and growth of an innovative scientist?
I know nothing about it. I once did a course in transcendental meditation because a friend of mine said it was worth everything to him, but it didn't then do anything for me. So I don't have any subjective experience of it. It seems to me perfectly possible that some sorts of meditation practices could have valuable physiological effects. I don't buy into anything mystical, but I'm open-minded enough to think that it could have some physiological benefits. And my friend Sam Harris certainly thinks it does.
Mr. Dawkins, people talk about hypocrites in any religion who say they believe their religion, but then they don't actually. Are there any hypocrites in atheism?
I'm not quite sure how that would come about. A hypocrite in religion is somebody who claims to believe something but doesn't. I suppose the hypocritical atheist would be one who claims not to believe something but does. I can't imagine why one would do that. So I rather doubt it.
Maybe it's an atheist who refuses to walk under ladders or next to black cats.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. Okay. Yes, somebody who has a sort of reserve of remaining superstition. Yeah, I guess there could be some like that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And your last one, we would love to understand your views on the cultural revolution of meme. Meme then versus meme now.
Meme as in M-E-M-E.
Correct.
Yes. Well, meme then, I regard as still meme now, but I'm aware that to some people, a meme is a picture with a bit of writing on it. That's a very restricted type of meme. A meme is a unit of cultural inheritance, something that is passed on by mimicry, by imitation. And they're very common among school children, for example. I suppose most of us remember our school days when we had crazes for particular kinds of toys, particular kind of games. And they spread really rather like an epidemic of measles or something, and then die away like an epidemic. So that would be a good example of a meme in the true sense of the word. A fashion of clothes, a fashion of music, that kind of thing would be an example. I proposed it as an analog for the gene, as a unit of natural selection, a form of natural selection. Biological natural selection is the differential survival of genes in gene pools. And I was trying to make the point that at the end of the selfish gene, that it doesn't have to be DNA, it doesn't have to be genes. It could be any kind of self-replicating information. And imitation in a culture is a form of self-replicating information, and therefore potentially it might be subject to a form of natural selection. So if an idea is popular, then it's likely to get passed on, likely to get imitated and passed around. And so it will be subject to a form of natural selection. And that could potentially, eventually, I suppose, lead to a form of evolution. It's hard to imagine good examples of that. I suggested religion as a possible example, that religions are evolving entities that evolve by means of mimetic selection. Ideas like belief in life after death are popular, and so get passed on, get passed around and believed because people want to believe them. And that is a form of natural selection. So that's the true meaning of a meme.
Okay, that's so interesting. And I have a follow-up question for you. Just looking at how AI is now being used to share ideas that have been around forever, how do you think artificial intelligence will impact or accelerate this memification of ideas, or even dissect the science of story and what kinds of ideas are actually sticky versus what ones sort of get lost?
Yes, I can't answer that. I don't know. It's such a new thing. I don't know whether you've tried going online and interrogating one of these AI bots.
Oh,
They're very, very impressive.
It's now my second brain, Richard.
Yeah, really?
Yes, I use it every day.
I've been very impressed asking one to say, write something in the style of so-and-so. And that's brilliant. I mean, I suggested write an essay on evolution in the style of Donald Trump, and that was amazing.
Have you tried writing have you asked it to write in your style to see how?
Well, I have. That was pretty impressive too. Yes. On the other hand, when I asked it a factual question, I mentioned, have I told you this before? I mentioned a woman called Helen Spurway, who was the wife of the geneticist J.B.S. Haldane. And I asked her, for some reason, I asked it a question about her. And it said, after Haldane's death, she was married to Richard Dawkins. So I said, no, she wasn't. And it said, oh, sorry, got that wrong. Or more words to that effect. And then it said, well, she was married to Aldous Huxley, and that was also wrong. It was also false. So I found that its factual knowledge was not great, but its ability to produce coherent prose, if you can call Donald Trump's prose coherent, was very impressive.
Yes, the hallucinations are real. I mean, it's quite funny. Have you thought about cataloging all of your work in one place as an AI? Would you even be comfortable with that? The Richard Dawkins AI that's just focused on your body of work and knowledge?
How would AI help to catalog?
So you would basically,
I don't quite understand that.
All of your books, all of your writings, all of your posts over time, so that it's solely trained only on you. So for instance, you were saying that the AI was coming up with these hallucinations about someone. But if you train it only on your work, then it will not have these sort of outside hallucinations.
I see. Well, I don't know how the training is done. I mean, that's done by the software engineers who run it.
And now it's so easy. I mean, I could train it for you. It's so easy.
Could you really?
I could. We could do the Richard Dawkins GPT. Very easy. And then you could,
how I could interrogate it and say, what is my opinion of so-and-so?
Correct. We should test it.
Well, I'd be interested. Yeah.
Okay.
If you know how to do that, I'd be fascinated.
I do. Let's give it a roll. Okay, well, that's it for today's question and answer session on Poetry of Reality. Please feel free to send in more questions to Richard's social media platforms for next time.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can show some support by subscribing to the podcast, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a review.